city is a melting pot with several races and cultures. But there's one ethnic mix in particular that truly shows you how you should never judge a book by its cover.
Meet Michael Jung, a second-generation Korean raised since infancy in the Dominican Republic.
I was born in New York, right here. It's just that my family emigrated to the Dominican Republic for work. I could say I was born and raised there because I really act like a Latino over there. But
And how do you act like a Latino over there?
like, very outgoing. When I speak, I always use my hands. A lot of Koreans, I don't think they really use their hands. Like, let alone like speak fast or a lot. A lot of Koreans that I've met, they're reserved. Like, when they speak, they're like straight on to the point.
Mm-hmm. Michael, who's fluent in English, Spanish, and Korean, is 100% connected to his adoptive country.
Yo me identifico más con los dominicanos. Solo que mis visuales solo son coreanos.
Although Michael currently lives in New York, as many Latin Asians do, his family represents the millions of people who have created a formidable Asian diaspora in Latin America, a trend with historical roots that dates back to the 16th century.
There's an uninterrupted relationship between Asia and the Americas, particularly Mexico and Peru. You know, both Mexico and Peru had ports that had this yearly trade with China through the Philippines, trade with China, India, and Japan. That was uninterrupted between 1565 and 1815.
The Manila Galleon trade were Spanish trading ships that sailed the Pacific Ocean for over 200 years between Spain, Acapulco, and Manila. Filipinos who were on these voyages were the first Latin Asians in the Americas and were followed in the 19th century by Indian and Chinese laborers who were brought to the Americas as part of the coolie trade.
African slaves were the most important labor force in tropical production in the Caribbean, in coastal Peru. So there were debates, you know, who was going to replace the slaves. And they thought in Indian indentured workers and Chinese indentured workers. So a large number of them are going to arrive to coastal plantations in Peru and Cuba.
There was a huge Chinese population in Cuba. They first came over as laborers, and then they opened their own businesses and started their own community there.
Maria Lau, a New Jersey born and bred fine art and documentary photographer of Latin Asian descent, documented her Chinese-Cuban ancestry in the multimedia series 71.
I never thought that 71 was going to be what it became, because it really just started with the intention of finding my aunts and fulfilling this wish for my grandfather, for my family. So it became my mission to find them. And it was going to be very difficult because their names would change, you know, when they get married. Just to trace things back from Cuba to China, it took years. And I was able to bring them all together. It was a once-in-a-lifetime encounter that you could never replicate.
Asians also migrated to Peru, which has the largest Asian population of any Latin American country.
If you grow up in Peru, chances are somebody in your family is of Chinese descent. It's like in our blood.
Fabiana Chu, who currently lives in New York, is a fourth-generation Chinese-Peruvian born and raised in Lima.
But never really had to, in Peru, explain what it was like to be Chinese Peruvian. I was never asked, when are you going back to China? I was never asked, are you really from here? Never, never. That was never a question that I was a Peruvian in Peru. But my race played a role in how people related to me. I wish it hadn't.
In Peru, as in many Latin American countries, whether you're Korean, Japanese, or from any other Asian background, you are almost always referred to as Chinese, or Chino, China, Chinita.
So that always made me uncomfortable. People choose to refer to you as what you look like, or what they think you look like. And I was always very uncomfortable with that.
That discomfort, however, never overshadowed Fabiana's cultural pride.
And then, of course, in Peru, we were being Peruvian 24/7, enjoying the food, being with our friends, visiting Machu Picchu, being proud of where we're from.
The Latin Asian mix is also celebrated through food, where dual heritage is served on a platter.
I'm very proud to be both Peruvian because I'm first Peruvian. I was born in Peru. And then I have the Asian culture, so I'm very proud of both.
Eduardo Oshiro is the Japanese-Peruvian owner of Aquario restaurant in Port Chester, where his native culinary traditions are not another passing food trend. In fact, the staples of Peruvian cuisine have deeply rooted Chinese and Japanese influences.
I think we're doing a good job by providing our culture to others. They're just about, in every plate there's Asian culture, Asian influence into it. The ceviche was already there in Peru, but it had a lot of Japanese culture mixed in. The fried rice, that's where you get the Chinese side. So that you got the Chinese, and then the Japanese would be the tiradito. And then your traditional would be the yuca la huancaína. As Peruvians, and in our food, we can offer a lot, for a lot of people that never tasted our food.
Whether it's through food, art, or just living life, Latin Asians are clearly a diverse group of people with different stories to tell, who share a common thread that defies perceptions of race and ethnicity.
Soy peruana.
Yo soy coreano, pero soy dominicano.
Soy peruano con descendencia japonesa.
Yo soy China cubana.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are almost 500,000 Asian Latinos living in the United States, mostly concentrated in New York, Texas, and California. For Asian American Life, I'm Tina Beth Pina.
Hundreds, the first Chinese immigrants arrived in Mexico, helping build the country and its railroads. Today, tens of thousands of Chinese call it home. But their success was preceded by turbulence and hardship. Correspondent Frank Contreras introduced us to a thriving community determined to retain its identity and culture.
The Chinese presence in Mexico goes back generations. They know the ancient lion dance brought here by their ancestors is a Chinese way of asking for and receiving life's abundance. Chinese families in Mexico, like the one Ignacio Chu belongs to, are digging deep into the history of how they came to this country. Chu's uncle proudly traces the family lineage back 23 generations to the Song dynasty.
I'm a Mexican like any other, but with the distinction that my roots are in the ancient culture of the Chinese.
Like most other world cities, the Mexican capital has its own Chinatown, complete with restaurants and stores that draw crowds of people.
Mexican shoppers are eager to get their hands on merchandise from all across China, especially this item here, which represents the Year of the Serpent, Chinese New Year.
Recently arrived Chinese immigrants can now get their favorite regional dishes in parts of the Mexican capital, which until recently had almost no contact with Chinese culture.
Authentic Chinese food like this from northern China is becoming increasingly common in neighborhoods throughout the Mexican capital as the Chinese immigrant community here continues to grow.
In one Mexico City neighborhood called Viaducto Piedad, Chinese immigrants have established their own religious and cultural centers. Anthropologist Monica Cinco visits this group frequently to study how they're making the transition to life in this increasingly diverse metropolis. Her father was born in China, but his father was Chinese and his mother was Mexican. By spending time with him, she learns about what he went through as a Chinese immigrant coming to Mexico.
What did they do? They detained Chinese people wherever they found them. State and local officials would come out to track down the Chinese community to round them up. They'd pile them onto a truck, and at night by the border between Nogales, Arizona and Mexico, they'd expel them at gunpoint.
It's part of Mexico's history that remains largely unknown.
It moves me very much because this has been many people's story who had a very difficult time and in the end came out ahead.
Al final del día salieron adelante. ¿Quién es? Dime tú. Mami. Es mami.
Her little daughter, Maria Sofia, is growing up with the knowledge that she has two cultures. She's reminded that even this Mexican tradition has its roots in China.
Pues a mí me gustaría que María Sofía.
I would like Maria Sofia to go to a preschool where she will learn Mandarin, and we plan to pass summers in China so that she can become familiar with the language, with the customs, because it's something that I'd like her to preserve. I want her to keep those Chinese roots.
Que ella la mantenga.
By taking these steps, Mónica Cinco hopes that her daughter, Maria Sofia, will grow up in Mexico and maintain a strong connection to the Chinese part of her identity.